The kid's mom is infertile and old. The kid must be disabled anyway. I ran into my ex-husband by chance 4 years after our divorce. He was walking in front of the station arm in arm with a young woman. I never wanted to see him again, but it couldn't be helped. There I was, unable to run away, holding my 3-year-old son's hand. Is that kid mine? I told you not to have it. It's none of your business anymore, is it? Sure, I have no intention of acknowledging him. Just don't bother me. He's just the worst kind of man. Deep down, I'm so glad I left him. But the woman next to my ex has been acting strange this whole time. Her face is pale, and her lips are trembling. She's frightened. Is that your child? She muttered. Who could have imagined the turmoil my son and I were about to be drawn into? My name is Natalie, a 46-year-old office worker. Now it's just me and my 3-year-old son Max living together. He was born when I was 43, through a pregnancy at an advanced age, but he's growing up healthy and strong, which makes me incredibly happy. I often think to myself how glad I am to have had him. When the biological father found out I was pregnant, he told me to get an abortion. Those were truly tough and painful days. I was reminiscing about those hellish days. After graduating from college, I got a job at a company and worked as the CEO's secretary. I hate to toot my own horn, but I was good at being considerate, and the CEO valued me highly. During that time, I met the CEO's son, Ethan. It's Ethan's eye, Natalie. It was love at first sight. Please marry me, Ethan said. Raised in a privileged environment, Ethan had his unreliable moments, but that only tickled my maternal instincts, and I agreed to marry him. Since I was already favored by Ethan's father, the CEO, he quickly approved of our marriage. Marrying a reliable person like Natalie will surely settle Ethan down. I'm really glad, Natalie. Please take care of him. Thank you. I'm happy to hear you say that, Ethan's father said. Ethan wanted me to support him at home, so I quit my job and became a full-time homemaker. I'm the eldest son, so I plan to take over my father's company in the future. Please support me. Understood. I'll support you with all I've got, I replied. My in-laws were very kind and we had a harmonious relationship, so I started living with them right after getting married. However, my mother-in-law was frail and needed care, which was unfortunate. My father-in-law was very kind to her, always speaking to her gently, and we wanted to be a couple like them, but that dream was not to be. My Phil was a very wealthy man, and we had an elderly living helper named Grace. Grace and I took care of my mother-in-law and the household chores. Grace was a good person, and we lived together, helping each other out like a real family, I recalled. Natalie, thank you always. I only had a son, so having you feels like having a real daughter, and it makes me happy. Thank you. Grace expressed her gratitude. I lost my parents early in an accident, so I was raised by my grandparents. My grandparents passed away, as if they were waiting for me to find a job. So I was truly grateful to have met my in-laws, I reflected. My married life was smooth sailing, but my husband's business affairs were not going so well. Though my husband intended to take over the company, his father felt Ethan was not up to the task in terms of management. As a result, my father-in-law was quite strict in his guidance towards Ethan, I explained. A few years later, ominous clouds began to gather over my marriage. Even after 5 years of marriage, we were unable to have children. Ethan blamed me. Why can't you have kids? All my friends had kids right after getting married. It's embarrassing that I'm the only one without kids. That's not fair. It's wrong to just decide it's my fault. There's no way the problem is with me. It has to be your fault, Ethan lamented. The conversation was futile. He baselessly decided that the infertility was my fault. While my husband was like this, my in-laws never pressured us about having children. I could tell they were considerate of me. They must have wanted to see their grandchildren too. Linda, I'm sorry we haven't been able to give you a grandchild yet. What are you talking about? It's not your fault, Natalie. That's right. Children are a blessing, and it's okay if we don't have them. We're just happy to have you with us.
my mother-in-law said. My in-law said this, but I wanted children too, and I wanted to give them grandchildren. So I started considering infertility treatment. However, my husband was not very enthusiastic about it. But I insisted, and he accompanied me to the hospital for an examination. The results showed that I had a condition that made my fallopian tubes prone to blockage, making it difficult for me to conceive.
See, I knew the problem was with you. I regret marrying you. It's like I drew the short straw. This is so frustrating. My husband blamed me, as if he had been proven right. But it was also found that he had a condition that made it difficult to conceive. His sperm count was low, and their motility was poor. What? No way. However, the doctor said it wasn't entirely impossible, so we were advised to continue treatment. I wanted to continue the treatment, but my husband was against it. I don't want to undergo such treatment. It's not like it's impossible for us to have kids. More than 10 years passed, and we remained childless. My husband had stopped saying he wanted children. Although my relationship with my in-laws was good, my relationship with my husband had become strained. He started coming home late at night, often after drinking, and his work was fraught with failures. He was frequently scolded by his father, the president, and was always in a bad mood. "It's your fault for not supporting me as my wife," he would lash out at me like that. Then, at the age of 43, I miraculously became pregnant. I was so happy and relieved that the difficult infertility treatment had paid off. I couldn't help but cry. I thought he would be happy, so I told my husband. But his reaction was unexpected. "Good news? Happy for you? I'm pregnant. Bringing this up now? What am I supposed to say? What, are you happy? Do you even realize how old you are? You're a 43-year-old woman. Don't you know there are risks with late pregnancies?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "It means the child could have disabilities. I want you to get an abortion." "What?" "I've decided to marry a younger woman who doesn't have these risks. Let's get a divorce. I'll give you alimony." How could he say such a thing? I felt like I had been thrown from heaven to hell. Unable to bear it, I decided to pack my things and leave the house. But first, I had to say goodbye to my in-laws. They were shocked by the sudden news. They asked me to stay and have the grandchild here, but living with my husband had become unbearable. Ignoring my in-laws' pleas, I left the house after receiving the alimony. I signed the divorce papers, changed my phone number, and cut ties with my in-laws. I heard my husband plan to remarry the new secretary his father had hired. It's a trivial matter now, but it seems my husband has a thing for secretaries. It would probably be uncomfortable for his new partner if I were around. I gave birth to my baby on my own. It was a beautiful baby boy. Raising a child alone was challenging, but my son was irreplaceably precious to me. One day, when my son was 3 years old, I unexpectedly ran into my ex-husband in front of the station. Isn't that Natalie?" Hearing a familiar voice, I had a bad feeling. I gripped my son Max's hand tightly. Seeing Max, my ex laughed and said, "Given the IVF and your age, the kid's probably got problems, huh?" My ex was walking arm in arm with a young woman. Could she be his new wife? I never wanted to see him again, but it couldn't be helped. There I was, unable to run away, holding my 3-year-old son's hand. "Is that kid mine? I told you not to have him. It's none of your business anymore, is it?" "Sure, I have no intention of acknowledging him. Just don't bother me. He was an awful man, and deep down, I'm so glad I left him." But the woman next to my ex had been acting strange the whole time. Her face pale, her lips trembling. "She's frightened." "Is that your child?" she muttered. She was whispering something into my ex-husband's ear. I couldn't hear well because her voice was so low, but I faintly caught the words, "Your father's estate is..." "Huh?" Ethan widened his eyes like saucers and stared intently at my son. Then he glared at me and yelled, "You're a stranger to me now. Don't you dare come near my family's home ever." And with that, the two of them ran off as if they were fleeing from me. What in the world was it about? I couldn't make heads or tails of it. but being told to stay away made me think there must be some secret at my in-laws' place. Curious about my ex and that woman's reactions, I found myself heading to my in-laws' home for the first time in 4 years. The helper Grace greeted me with tears in her eyes, saying, "It's been so long, madam. I'm so glad to see you." My Mill had passed away 2 years ago, and my Phil was bedridden due to illness. Seeing me, my Phil was overjoyed despite his frail condition, but he looked haggard, pale, and sick. "You've come at last, Natalie. I've been looking for you everywhere, David. It's been a while. I'm sorry for not visiting sooner." My Phil tenderly stroked Max's head with a look of affection. He then handed me a business card, urging me to visit a lawyer. The lawyer was a close friend of my Phil. Following my father-in-law's advice, I visited the lawyer and was shocked by the startling truth he revealed. 2 months later, I received a call from Grace, the household helper, informing me of my father-in-law's passing. She also shared some intriguing news with me. 3 days later, dressed in mourning clothes and with my son by my side, I headed to the funeral service. The ceremony had already started, with my ex-husband delivering the eulogy. The young woman I had met previously was standing close by him. "My father may have passed away, but I will be taking over the company and protecting it firmly, along with Molly, my father's secretary. We will also build our family together, so I ask for your support." He spoke without shedding a tear, delivering his speech with gusto. During the eulogy, Ethan noticed me and my son and shouted in surprise, "Natalie, what are you doing here? Get out. This place isn't for you." Ethan ordered his employee to drag me out of the funeral hall. I was upset at how rudely my own son was being treated, even though I had Max with me. But I couldn't resist when several men started pulling at my arms. The mourners were shocked by the commotion, looking at us with a buzz of whispers. "Please, everyone, be quiet." The person who stopped the commotion was a lawyer who had been of service to my Phil for many years. "There is a will that the late president asked to be announced at his funeral. Stop it. There's no need to say it. I, his only son, will inherit everything." Ethan tried to stop him, but the lawyer ignored him and began reading the will. The contents were shocking. The company was to be left to the vice president, who had worked hand in hand with the president to grow the company. As for his son Ethan, lacking in managerial talent, he was advised to work under the vice president. His estate was to be left entirely to the child born to his ex-wife, me, if there was one, appointing me as the guardian. I was not surprised, as the lawyer had informed me of everything in advance. But the mourners were in an uproar. Ethan's fiancée bit her lip, her eyes darting around in confusion. She was working as a secretary to my Phil, so it seems that she knew the contents of the will by some means. So when she first saw Max, she was shocked because she thought Max would take away the inheritance. "What about my position? Are people going to jail? Don't I have a position to worry about?" Ethan looked at me, his face turning pale, glaring at me as if he saw a demon. In fact, I had heard from the helper, Grace. She saw Ethan and his fiancée Molly putting flowers in my father-in-law's food. Grace found it suspicious and secretly took photos with her cell phone. I got those photos from Grace and, after researching online, discovered that the flower is highly toxic. It's a common flower, but both its stem and root are poisonous, and even drinking water from a vase with this flower can be lethal. "That's a lie. You made this up." Ethan tried to shift the blame onto his fiancée Molly. Molly panicked. "You were the one who said we couldn't become president until your father was gone and asked for my cooperation. You said you overheard Dad and the lawyer discussing leaving the estate to Natalie's son, which is why I felt I had no choice but to do what I did to Dad. It's your fault." "How dare you blame me? You were the one who brought the poisonous flowers, not me." Both of them ended up confessing everything, effectively admitting their guilt in front of all the mourners. Ethan, in a complete about-face, began apologizing to me. "Natalie, I'm so sorry. Please tell everyone this was all a lie. My life is over if the police get involved." "It's too late for that. I've already submitted the evidence to the police. They should be arriving any minute now." Leaving behind a wailing Molly and a stunned ex-husband, I left the scene. I heard the sound of a police car approaching. I didn't want Max to witness any more of his father's disgrace. Subsequently, my husband and Molly were taken away by the police. The crime of taking his father's life is serious, and he has no remorse, so it will take him many years to get out of the fence. With the inheritance left by my Phil, I bought a house in the suburbs, where I now live with my son. Having witnessed my ex-husband blinded by greed to the extent of harming his own father, I am committed to living a modest life to ensure we don't fall into similar pitfalls. I continue to work as before, pouring love into raising my son. Just seeing my son grow up healthy and happy fills me with contentment, a sentiment that defines my current state of happiness.
My name is Julie. I currently work with my husband, Scott, at his family's small business. This business is managed by my father-in-law, Paul. It's a cozy place with about 5 employees. Paul doesn't get involved much in the daily work. Instead, Scott, who will soon take over as president, works hard. He looks for new clients and projects, showing his dedication to growing the business. When we have a big project, all the employees come together enthusiastically, creating a vibrant atmosphere. I have been working here for 12 years since I got married. Hey, Julie, how long do you plan on clinging to our family business? My mother-in-law, Olivia, asked this as I came home early to make dinner while Scott was still at the office. Olivia had retired from the business when Scott and I got married and seemed happy about her retirement, but now, with more free time, she often criticized me. "What do you mean by clinging?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Olivia sharply replied, "Exactly what it sounds like. You must have married Scott because you couldn't find a job anywhere else, and now you're just taking advantage of our company." I sighed to myself. These kinds of comments from her were becoming more common. When I married, I left my previous job and joined Scott's family business by choice, not because I was fired. For some reason, Olivia thought I was completely unskilled at my job. I said before that it's not that I couldn't work somewhere else. I chose to join Scott's company, I told her. But she answered dismissively, "I can see right through your real intentions." She thought she knew everything about me and walked back to the living room. However, the problems with my mother-in-law weren't just her words. She had quit her job, promising to look after the house, but she never helped out. My father-in-law often asked her to do some chores since she was home all day, but she stubbornly refused, saying, "I've worked all my life. Now it's the daughter-in-law's turn to do the housework." As a result, I usually ended up making dinner. Olivia seemed to make and eat her own lunch as she liked, but she never cleaned up afterward. Each day, as I returned from my errands, the sight of piled-up plates and utensils greeted me, stirring a mix of frustration and resignation. Gathering my courage, I decided to address this domestic issue one sunny afternoon. "Olivia," I began hesitantly, trying to sound as diplomatic as possible, "I've noticed the dishes often get left in the sink. It would be really helpful if you could tidy up after your meals. It's just a small request, but it would mean a lot to me." To my dismay, Olivia's response was far from understanding. Her eyes flashed with anger as she snapped, "Are you trying to give me orders in my own house? You're just a daughter-in-law. How dare you dictate what I should do?" Her sharp and unyielding words reminded me of the delicate balance in our family dynamics. "I wish Helen were here instead of you," Olivia continued, her voice laced with a mix of longing and bitterness. Helen, Scott's younger sister and my sister-in-law, was a spirited and ambitious woman. Our encounters had been limited to brief formal meetings, and she was notably absent from our wedding, having canceled at the last minute. I later learned from Scott that she had overindulged with friends the night before and was nursing a hangover, unable to attend. Despite this, Helen pursued her dreams fiercely, relocating to Jersey after her college graduation to dive into the bustling world of fashion design. Trying to change the subject, I mentioned Helen's hard work and dedication. "Helen's really making a name for herself in Jersey, working hard in her field," I said, hoping to ease the tension. However, Olivia's views on Jersey were negative. Jersey, that cold, impersonal city. It's no place for someone as warm-hearted as Helen. And you're from Jersey too, aren't you? Now it all makes sense. You're always so distant towards me. Caught in this tiring conversation, I realized that if I didn't start preparing dinner soon, we'd be eating much later than usual. While dealing with my own frustrations, I managed to stay calm. Mom, let's continue this conversation later. I need to focus on getting dinner ready or we'll be eating quite late tonight. With some reluctance, Olivia finally went back to the living room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the noise of the cooking utensils. Paul and Scott were both aware of Olivia's mistreatment towards me as a daughter-in-law and tried to intervene whenever they saw it happening. However, their efforts seemed to have little effect. Each time they confronted the situation, their faces showed concern and frustration, showing their desire to create harmony in our family. Ironically, whenever Paul and Scott scolded Olivia for her behavior, she took out her anger on me, becoming even more hostile and sharp with her words. Her face, usually kind and gentle, became twisted with disdain, her tone cutting deeper than before. Although I had never been physically hurt, the emotional impact of Olivia's words was significant. Paul and Scott's support had been my comfort, helping me somewhat ignore Olivia's harsh words. Until then, one morning, just after I had finished cleaning up from breakfast and was preparing to leave for work, something unimaginable happened. In the midst of the morning rush as I was hurrying, Olivia suddenly exclaimed, "Oh my, what a mess!" And without warning, she poured a bucket of water over my handbag. I was stunned, a mix of shock and anger making me speechless. "What are you doing, Olivia?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling with disbelief. Olivia's response was dismissive, her tone like that of a mischievous child. "Oh, was that your stuff? I thought it was just a big piece of trash," she said dismissively, which made me even angrier. "Even if you thought it was trash, who pours water on it? What kind of thinking is that? Now the carpet is all wet. Why would you do something like this?" I was really upset as I quickly took the wet things out of my bag, including important work documents, and laid them on the table. Olivia looked calm and didn't seem sorry or worried about how upset I was. "Because you don't need to go to work anymore," she said coolly. I was shocked. In our living room, filled with morning light, I sat across from Olivia. Her face was colder and more determined than usual. It was as if she had made a decision that would change everything. "Excuse me," I said, confused and surprised. "You've been in this house for 12 years, but now I can finally get rid of you," she declared. Her words hurt me deeply, and her voice had a level of anger and determination I had never heard before. My mind spun and my heart ached. "Getting rid of me?" I asked, unable to believe what I was hearing. Her words made me feel like an outsider in this family. "Actually, my daughter is joining the company, so we need you to leave. Today's your last day. All you have to do is bow your head to your father-in-law and Scott, apologizing for all the trouble you've caused," she said with a mocking laugh. She was using my job to push me out. I had spent years at that job earning respect and making memories. I was shocked and hurt. My devotion to this family seemed to mean nothing to her. It horrified me not just that she acted this way, but that after 12 years of hard work, she could ask me to leave so her daughter could take my place. It felt like my years of effort were being disregarded. "Really? Are you sure about this? Wasn't Helen working in a clothing store in Jersey?" I asked, reflecting my confusion and worry. My job was more than just a paycheck. It was my way of fulfilling myself. Meanwhile, Helen, my sister-in-law, seemed to have grown tired of city life and decided to come back to the family. She said she was tired of the unfriendly people in Jersey, so I told her if she came back home, I'd have a job ready for her. She agreed to return immediately. "Now that she's coming back, I want you out of this house," Olivia told me. I couldn't believe her words. She was ready to turn my life upside down with just one decision, completely ignoring my role in the family and not even listening to me. She handed me an envelope, saying, "I've written your resignation letter." And just like that, she kicked me out. My heart broke. Everything I had built over the years seemed worthless, treated like just a piece of paper. Her act deeply hurt our family bond. I walked the company just a quick 5-minute walk from my house. As I walked under the cool morning sky, each step was heavy with the weight of what was happening. When I told my father-in-law, Paul, and my husband's, Scott, about what my mother-in-law had said, they were shocked but stayed calm. They suggested that maybe it was time for me to resign to show her the reality of the situation. This idea upset me deeply. I had worked hard in our family business for years and barely knew what a long vacation was like aside from short breaks during Thanksgiving and the holiday season. Encouraged by Scott and Paul's kind words, "Why don't you spread your wings for a change?" I decided to go on a little trip. As I packed, I thought a lot about my life, my choices, and what was ahead. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law, Helen, who was supposed to replace me at the company, shockingly didn't show up until 3:00 p.m. Her lack of responsibility disappointed Scott and Paul, who had been managing without me. Helen seemed not interested in learning the work, despite their efforts to teach her. Hearing this made me worry about the future of our company, even as I looked forward to my trip, leaving without seeing my mother-in-law. I quickly started my journey. During the trip, as I enjoyed the view from the train, I reflected on my life, past, present, and future, and savored local seafood delicacies. I thought deeply about myself, my family, and our business. But on the 5 days of my trip, the peace was broken when Helen called me crying. "What's going on?" I asked. "Mom said it was an easy job, just sitting in a chair, but Scott and Dad are acting like I can't do anything right," she said. Her words, likely influenced by my mother-in-law, surprised me. Even as I was enjoying my break, I decided it was time to address the situation. "So, Helen, how good are you with computers?" I asked her hesitantly. She replied, "Well, I usually watch videos online and I play games too." This question was to see if Helen could adjust to a new job. Having worked in a clothing store in Jersey for a while, her computer skills seemed basic. "Do you know how to use Word or Excel?" I asked. Helen looked confused, showing she wasn't familiar with these tools in a professional setting. Even in clothing stores, tasks like managing sales data in Excel or recording customer info in Word are common. "Have you ever worked with image editing, video editing, or audio editing software? Do you have any experience with such tools?" I asked. Helen, clearly puzzled, replied, "What's all that?" This question aimed to dig deeper into her technical skills to better understand her capabilities. Considering her background in the apparel industry, it's unlikely she never used a computer. Tasks like tracking sales, managing inventory, and inputting customer data would have required her to use Excel. When asked if she can handle calculations for sales or fill in documents, she confidently said, "I can do that." However, when I asked if she could also calculate tax, her confidence faded, and she answered uncertainly. This question tested her math skills and her ability to use them in a business context. While Helen might have other skills, it was clear she was insecure about the necessary skills for the job. Her discomfort seemed mainly due to her struggle with calculations, which could explain why she faced criticism from Paul and Scott. First and foremost, I needed to show my mother-in-law and those who tried to push me out that they were mistaken. "Since you're taking over my job," I told Helen that she needed to handle the accounting tasks well and remember to be professional in her emails, because a casual tone that might be fine with friends doesn't work for business. She would also be in charge of scheduling the staff shifts. Even though our team is small, we carefully consider everyone's time off requests, so she shouldn't just think about what's convenient for her. As I listed these expectations, I could hear her sobbing on the other end of the phone. But I was told I wouldn't have to do anything. Why are there so many tasks? I didn't come back home for this, she said, and then abruptly ended the call. Over the next 4 days, I decided to enjoy sightseeing in Jersey, the place Helen had left. My time there showed me that not everyone in Jersey is unfriendly. Actually, finding someone as cold-hearted as my mother-in-law and Helen seemed rare. A week after I left my job, I returned to my in-laws' house. When I arrived, Olivia, looking very upset, confronted me angrily. "How dare you make my daughter cry? You won't get away with this," she yelled, her eyes full of anger and misunderstanding. She tried to grab me, but Scott and Paul quickly stepped in to calm her down. Though her anger didn't seem to lessen, Scott sighed deeply before saying, "Helen is upset because she was scolded for trying to boss her employees around despite not being able to do the job right. It's not Julie's fault. Besides, Julie hasn't been here for a week, so she couldn't have upset Helen." "Mom, you really need to stop these groundless accusations," but Olivia kept blaming me. "It's because of her. This woman is the reason for Helen's trouble," she claimed, her voice emotional and filled with baseless suspicions. "Where is Helen, by the way?" I asked, looking around the living room, but Helen was nowhere to be seen. Her absence added more confusion to an already puzzling situation. While it didn't matter to me that Olivia was upset about Helen, I knew Helen didn't have many options since she had ended her lease at her apartment in Jersey. I thought Helen would be at her parents' house, but she wasn't there, which made me wonder. Helen's locked herself in her room. She's been crying and saying she doesn't want to go to work anymore, Scott explained. It seemed like Helen had avoided learning the job properly. It was understandable, though, because she didn't have the skills needed to replace me. "You've been turning Scott and Paul against me, haven't you? Otherwise, they wouldn't say the company ran better with you than with Helen, who can't do the job," Olivia accused me sharply. Her words were filled with long-standing misunderstandings and prejudices, leaving me completely baffled. She seemed to have always seen me as an opponent, her words reflecting years of wrong ideas. Scott let out a heavy sigh, his face showing his tiredness and frustration with the complicated emotions in our family. He had tried many times to clear up the misunderstandings among family members, but it didn't seem to work very well. "Mom, I know it might sound odd coming from me, but Julie is truly exceptional at her work. She's certified in bookkeeping, and her secretarial skills are top-notch. Moreover, she studied Spanish and even has experience studying abroad. When it comes to dealing with multiple languages at our company, Julie handles everything," Scott said with a sense of pride. His mother, Olivia, looked very surprised. She had assumed that I quit my job as soon as I joined the family, so she had no idea about my contributions and achievements at work. "What? That sounds like something straight out of a TV drama," I thought, recalling my college days. I was so focused on getting various certifications that I immersed myself in my studies, so much that I barely had time for clubs or a romantic relationship. It was during this busy time that I met Scott, who came to my company for business. As I found myself sharing the story of how Scott and I first met, I realized that this wasn't what Olivia wanted to hear, so I quickly got back to the main point. In short, I was responsible for a lot of tasks at the company, from handling accounting to scheduling, working with other companies, and managing employee shifts. Thanks to that, I could reach out to other businesses for deals, making the work environment much more comfortable than when Olivia was around, Scott added, leaving Olivia speechless. Just then, Paul, Scott's father, made a comment that surprised me. "We're going to shut down the company soon, actually. Helen made a big mistake. Even though she was supposed to prepare some documents, she decided to handle phone calls because it seemed more fun. while Scott and I were away, she ended up being rude to the person in charge from another company. Of course, I got a call to confirm this. Hearing this, I was so shocked that I instinctively covered my mouth with my hand. "I can't believe Helen would do something like that," I murmured, filled with disbelief. The thought that Helen's actions might lead to the downfall of our company went through my mind, filling me with dread. However, as I was lost in these anxious thoughts, the story took an unexpected turn. When I explained the situation, they suggested it might be time to end the family business. "We had mentioned this to you before, right? About being absorbed by another company," they said. Then the president of the company stepped forward, saying he was interested if Julie and I were involved. This was an unexpected but long-hoped-for development. Running a family business has its limits, and it's uncertain whether we could consistently attract stable customers. That's why Scott had always worked hard in sales, trying to secure new clients. Being absorbed by a larger company could mean having a steady base of customers. The future, once uncertain, suddenly seemed to have a bit of hope. However, this news only brought relief to me, Scott, and his father. Scott's mother suddenly opposed the idea, saying, "That's not acceptable. Scott must become the president. This company is ours, isn't it?" I was surprised by this sudden change. It seemed that more than a stable future, Olivia was concerned about maintaining the prestige of being part of a company president's family. "And you're telling me he's not going to be the president anymore?" "Absolutely not acceptable," Olivia exclaimed passionately. This commotion caught the interest of Helen, who was upstairs in her room, leading her to come down to the living room to see what was happening. In response to the chaos started by Olivia, Paul spoke up calmly but firmly. "I am divorcing you. So either way, you will no longer be part of this executive family. Not only have you not changed your attitude towards my son's wife, but you also neglect household chores. To top it off, you spend your days out with young men instead of being home. I have no intention of supporting such a wife any longer." This was news to both me and Scott. We were so shocked that we could only stare at Paul with wide eyes. It seemed he had planned to discuss divorce from the beginning, as he took out divorce papers and a photo of Olivia with a young man from the living room shelf, placing them on the table. "If you sign the divorce papers now and leave with your belongings, I won't ask for alimony. I know getting any money from you would be pointless anyway," Paul said. "So unfair. How can you say that? Haven't I been devoted to this house all these years?" Olivia protested. "Devoted to this house? Have you done any real housework in the last 12 years? Does spending someone else's money on young men count as devotion to the house?" Paul countered. It was the first time we saw him this angry. Seeing this, Helen, who had come down to the living room, was visibly shaking from shock. "Helen, you're part of this too. You came back home because you couldn't make it in Jersey, and now you can't find a job but still act superior. In the end, you stopped working entirely. Who did you inherit this escapism from? It's time for you to leave this house too," he continued. Next, we saw Helen's shock and resistance. She believed she was an important member of the family. The reality was different. "Wait a minute, Dad. I might be a lost cause, but I'm your precious daughter, right?" she said. The family conflict deepened as Helen tried to assert her place, revealing her betrayal towards her mother. "Helen, are you betraying me now?" Olivia exclaimed, feeling betrayed by her daughter at the last moment. However, as the two started to argue loudly, Paul sternly silenced them with a shout. "If I just kick you out, it'll cause trouble for everyone. So I've asked an acquaintance to take you in. They'll be here soon to pick you up. Get your minimum belongings ready." Left with no choice, Olivia and Helen began packing their belongings. Then an acquaintance of Paul arrived to take Olivia and Helen away. The person who came to pick them up was running a factory with dormitories, and it seemed they would be working there. Meanwhile, Scott Paul, and I talked to the employees about the company being absorbed and prepared for the busy days ahead for our future. Finally, I found out I was pregnant. When I told the president of the company, he was delighted and promised to send someone to replace me, which was a huge relief. Currently, Scott and Paul are working even harder for the sake of our upcoming child.
My husband didn't invite his parents to the wedding, but my in-laws stormed in on my wedding day. My mother-in-law shouted at me, "You dishwasher, how did you come into my son's life?" She also insulted my family. I felt embarrassed and asked her to stop speaking. In her anger, she approached me and pulled my hair hard, causing me to drop to the floor. Everyone was shocked. My husband came forward, pulled my mother-in-law back, and asked her to leave the event. I decided to take revenge with the help of my friend. The very next day, I gave them a shocking surprise. My name is Anna Walker, and this is the story of my life, one filled with love, betrayal, and the fight for justice. I'm 29 years old, a law student, but not long ago, I was just a dishwasher at a local restaurant in Seattle, Washington. I never thought I would find love in such an ordinary place, but that's exactly where my story begins. It was a rainy afternoon when Ethan Brooks walked into the diner for the first time. I had been scrubbing dishes in the back, trying to drown out the sounds of clattering plates and the sizzling grill. But when I stepped out to refill a coffee pot, I saw him. Ethan was tall, with dark hair and an easy smile that could light up the dreariest of days. I felt a strange warmth rush over me, an unexpected flutter in my stomach. "Can I get you anything?" I asked, trying to sound professional, but my voice wavered slightly. "Just coffee for now." "Black, please," he replied, looking straight into my eyes. "And maybe your number if you're not too busy." I laughed at his boldness, my cheeks flushing. "Sorry, I don't give my number to customers. Company policy." "Is that so? Well, I'll just have to come back every day until you change your mind," he grinned. And that's precisely what he did. He came in every single day, for 2 weeks. At first, it was just coffee and light conversation. He was charming, asking about my life, and I found myself looking forward to our chats. There was something special about him, something that made me feel seen. Finally, after 2 weeks of his persistent charm, I agreed to go out with him. "Fine," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "One date, but don't get your hopes up, Mr. Brooks." That one date turned into 6 months of pure bliss. We spent countless evenings laughing over cheap takeout, going for walks by the waterfront, and dreaming about the future. Ethan was different from anyone I had ever met. He saw beyond my job as a dishwasher. He appreciated me for who I was, not for my circumstances. But as our relationship deepened, I began to worry about what would happen when he introduced me to his family. Ethan came from wealth, and I worried his parents would look down on me because of my job and my modest background. What if they don't like me? I asked him one evening as we sat on the couch, watching the rain pour outside. "They'll love you. They just need to get to know you," he assured me, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. One evening, just after we celebrated our 6-month anniversary, Ethan surprised me with a proposal. He took me to our favorite spot by the waterfront, where the moonlight danced on the water's surface. "Anna," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "will you marry me?" I was speechless. Tears filled my eyes as I nodded, barely able to breathe. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." As we began planning our wedding, I was excited yet anxious about meeting his parents, Henry and Catherine Brooks. I knew they owned a successful import-export business, but what I didn't know was how harsh their judgment would be. The day finally came when I was introduced to them. We gathered at a lavish restaurant, and as soon as I walked in, I felt small. The Brooks family was everything I wasn't: wealthy, polished, and powerful. Henry was imposing, with a stern expression, while Catherine was all sharp elegance, her eyes scanning me like I was a specimen under a microscope. "Ethan tells us you're a dishwasher?" Catherine asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "Yes," I replied, trying to stand tall. "I work at the diner while I finish my law degree." "Law degrees?" Henry scoffed. "That's quite ambitious for someone in your position." I could feel my heart pounding. I'm determined to make something of myself, I said, trying to hold my ground. But it only got worse from there. The dinner was filled with thinly veiled insults and judgmental glances. Afterward, as we walked out, I turned to Ethan. They don't like me, I whispered, my heart sinking. It doesn't matter. I love you, Anna. That's all that counts, he replied, but I could sense his tension. However, the situation escalated quickly. Ethan and I decided to have a small wedding, just close friends, no family. I was relieved, but also nervous about what would happen if his parents found out. On the day of our wedding, just as I was about to walk down the aisle, the doors burst open. There stood Henry and Catherine, their faces filled with fury. What are you doing? Henry shouted, shocking everyone into silence. Catherine stepped forward, her voice cold as ice. You can't marry her, Ethan. She's a gold digger. Just look at her. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. Please, just let us have our day, I begged, trying to maintain my composure. But Catherine didn't stop. You think this poor girl can make you happy? She'll only drag you down. As I stood there, my heart racing, I felt tears prick my eyes. I tried to speak up, to defend myself, but before I could say anything, Catherine lunged at me. She pulled my hair hard, and I fell to the ground, completely mortified as gasps filled the room. Ethan surged forward, anger blazing in his eyes. Get away from her, he shouted, pulling his mother back. You have no right to treat her like this. In that moment, I realized how serious the situation had become. My wedding day, which was supposed to be filled with joy, had turned into a battleground. And as Henry and Catherine stormed out, leaving us all in shock, I felt a mix of anger and devastation wash over me. The wedding ceremony had been ruined, but I refused to let them have the last word. My heart hardened. I would not let this humiliation define me. It was time to take a stand against the Brooks family and show them that I was more than just a dishwasher. I was determined to reclaim my dignity, no matter the cost. After the disaster that was my wedding day, everything felt shattered. Ethan and I had to pick up the pieces of our relationship, but I could sense a change in him. The humiliation of what happened lingered in the air between us, and though we tried to move forward, it wasn't easy. That night, as we returned home, I could see the worry etched on Ethan's face. I'm so sorry, Anna. I never thought they would show up like that, he said, his voice heavy with regret. It's not your fault, I replied, though my heart ached with embarrassment. But I can't just forget what happened. They think I'm nothing because of my job and background. Ethan took my hands, his grip firm. You are so much more than that. I love you for who you are, not what you do. We'll figure this out together. Despite his reassurance, I couldn't shake the anger bubbling inside me. I had been pushed to the ground in front of everyone, and my dignity had been stripped away. I needed to do something. I needed to make them pay for the way they treated me. In the days following the wedding, I reached out to Mason Grant, an old friend from law school. He had always been supportive of my ambitions, and I knew he would understand the fire burning within me. Anna, it's been too long, Mason said when we met at a coffee shop. What's going on? You look like you've been through a war. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. Mason, I need your help. Ethan's parents publicly humiliated me at our wedding. I want to expose their hypocrisy. I want to show everyone who they really are. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you have in mind? I explained my plan to investigate Henry and Catherine's import-export business. I had heard whispers of shady dealings, but I needed concrete evidence. I want to show the world that their wealth comes from illegal activities, I said, my determination shining through. Mason nodded, his expression serious. I can help with that. Let's gather some information and see what we can find. For weeks, we dug into the Brooks family's business. I spent my evenings researching and compiling data while Mason made connections in the industry. We discovered that the Brooks business was not as pristine as they claimed. Rumors of unregistered exports and tax evasion circulated, but we needed proof. One afternoon, while going through public records, Mason stumbled upon a critical piece of information. Anna, look at this, he exclaimed, pointing to his laptop screen. They've been under investigation for potential tax fraud. If we can gather enough evidence, we could bring them down. Excitement and fear flooded my veins. This is it, Mason. We have to dig deeper. As we continued our investigation, I felt a sense of empowerment growing within me. I was no longer the shy girl working at a diner. I was a woman on a mission, determined to reclaim my dignity and fight back against the prejudice I faced. Each piece of evidence we collected became a stepping stone towards justice. Meanwhile, Ethan was supportive but worried about the risks. Anna, I love your passion, but are you sure you want to do this? It could blow up in your face, he cautioned one evening. I have to do this, Ethan. I can't let them get away with treating me like I'm worthless, I replied, my voice steady. He nodded, though I could see the concern in his eyes. Just be careful. I don't want to lose you in this fight. Weeks turned into months as we meticulously built our case against the Brooks family. I pored over documents, analyzed financial records, and even interviewed former employees who had left under suspicious circumstances. With every new piece of information, my resolve strengthened. I felt like a warrior preparing for battle. Then, just when I thought we had enough evidence to act, we hit a snag. Mason called me one night, his voice tense. Anna, I just heard some unsettling news. The Brooks family is aware that someone is digging into their business. They're not going to let this go quietly. My heart raced. What do you mean? They've been looking for information about you. They might try to intimidate you or worse, he warned. Fear gripped me, but I refused to back down. Let them come. I won't be scared into silence. As the days passed, I realized that the fight wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about standing up for myself, proving my worth, and showing the world that I wouldn't be a victim. I had risen from being a dishwasher to someone who could take on powerful adversaries. And with Ethan by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came next. But I knew we were entering dangerous territory. The Brooks family was powerful, and I was just a woman with a dream. Little did I know, the confrontation that awaited me would change everything. The tension in the air was palpable as Mason and I prepared to take the next step against the Brooks family. We had gathered substantial evidence against Henry and Catherine's import-export business, but I knew we needed to act carefully. The stakes were high, and I could feel the weight of our plan bearing down on me. Anna, are you sure you're ready for this? Mason asked one evening as we sat in my small apartment, documents sprawled across the table like a battlefield map. I have to be, I replied, my determination unwavering. I won't let them continue to ruin lives with their illegal dealings. It's time to expose them for who they really are. Mason nodded, though his brow furrowed with concern. Okay, let's make sure we have everything in place. Once we go public, there's no turning back. With our plan set, we decided to approach a local news station that had a reputation for investigative reporting. We met with Samantha Reed, a seasoned journalist known for her fierce dedication to uncovering the truth. As we sat in a small conference room, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Tell me everything, Samantha said, her pen poised above her notepad. I took a deep breath and began recounting the events leading up to our investigation, the humiliation at my wedding, the Brooks family's disdain for my background, and our discoveries about their illegal operations. I shared every detail, showing her the evidence we had collected, financial records, testimonies from former employees, and the research Mason had painstakingly compiled. Samantha listened intently, her eyes widening as the pieces fell into place. This is serious, she said, her voice steady. If what you say is true, I can help you expose them. We'll set up a detailed report and get this story out to the public. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me. For the first time since the wedding disaster, I felt empowered. With Samantha's help, we would reveal the truth, not just for my sake, but for all the people who had suffered under the Brooks family's shady dealings. Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly with the news station. The closer we got to the story breaking, the more I could sense the Brooks family's looming threat. My phone buzzed with notifications about new rumors spreading online, tales of my so-called gold-digging past resurfacing as if to undermine my credibility. Anna, they're trying to discredit you, Mason said one day, looking concerned as he scrolled through social media. We need to be ready for backlash. I'm not going to let them intimidate me, I replied firmly. This fight is about more than just us now. It's about showing everyone that they can't get away with this. The day finally arrived when Samantha's report was set to air. I sat in my living room, heart racing as I watched the news. The screen flickered to life, and there was Samantha, poised and professional. Tonight, we expose a local family accused of illegal activities in their business dealings, she announced, and my heart leaped. As she detailed our findings, I felt a mixture of pride and fear. This was it. We were pulling back the curtain on the Brooks family, shining a light on their dark secrets. But then, just as I thought I was ready for anything, the phone rang. It was Ethan. "Anna, you need to come home right now." "It's urgent," he said, his voice strained. "What's wrong?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "Just come home. Please," he urged. I rushed back to our apartment, fear coursing through me. As I entered, I found Ethan pacing, his face pale. "What's going on?" I demanded. "It's about my parents," he said, running a hand through his hair. "They've been watching you. They're furious about the report." Before I could respond, there was a loud knock on the door. My heart raced as I exchanged worried glances with Ethan. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice shaking. "It's the police," came a voice from the other side. "We need to speak with you." Suddenly, all my fears coalesced into a single thought. The Brooks family wouldn't let this go without a fight. As I opened the door, I braced myself for the confrontation that was about to unfold, knowing that the battle was far from over. As I opened the door, 2 police officers stood before me, their expressions serious. "Ms. Walker," one of them asked, "we need to discuss some allegations related to your investigation into the Brooks family." Ethan stepped forward, concern etched on his face. "What kind of allegations?" he demanded. "Can we come inside?" the officer replied, glancing at the hallway. I nodded, heart racing as I led them into our living room. The weight of uncertainty hung heavy in the air. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We received an anonymous tip claiming that you and your friend may have fabricated evidence against the Brooks family," the officer explained, watching my reaction closely. I felt a surge of anger. "That's absurd. Everything we've uncovered is legitimate. We've been following the law, and we have evidence to prove it." The officer raised a hand. "We're not accusing you of anything yet, but we need to verify the claims. We'd like to see the evidence you've gathered." Ethan looked at me, his eyes filled with worry. "Anna, they're trying to turn this around on you. They're scared." I took a deep breath, channeling my determination. "I won't let them intimidate us. They may have power and money, but I have the truth on my side." After the officers left, I turned to Ethan, whose anxiety mirrored my own. "We can't back down now. We need to gather our evidence and be prepared for anything." We spent the next few days compiling every document, testimony, and piece of information we had gathered. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications, threats from anonymous accounts attempting to intimidate me further. I refused to let fear take hold. Finally, the day arrived when the police returned for our evidence. We presented everything meticulously, showing them financial records, testimonies from former employees, and documentation of their illegal dealings. With each piece of evidence, I could feel my heart racing, a mixture of dread and determination. After reviewing the files, the officers left with a promise to investigate the claims against the Brooks family thoroughly. I knew we had taken a crucial step, but the battle wasn't over. The Brooks family was still powerful, and I needed to be ready for their retaliation. That night, I called Mason. "I need your help. I feel like they're going to strike back soon," I confessed. "We'll stay ahead of them." "You're not alone in this fight," Mason assured me. His support was a reminder that I had allies who believed in me. The following weeks felt like a tense waiting game. Then, out of the blue, a breakthrough came. Samantha reached out to tell me that her investigation had gained traction. The news of the police investigation into the Brooks family had leaked, and suddenly, their empire was under scrutiny. As the media began to cover the story, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. People began to rally behind me, voicing their support on social media, sharing their own stories of struggle against injustice. I was no longer just a victim. I was a symbol of resilience. In the end, the Brooks family was called to answer for their actions. Henry and Catherine were arrested on multiple charges, including tax fraud and illegal exports. As news of their downfall spread, I felt a sense of justice wash over me. I had fought back against the prejudices and betrayals that had tried to define me. Through it all, Ethan stood by my side, stronger than ever. "You did this, Anna. You stood up and fought for what was right," he said one evening, pulling me close. "Together," I replied, knowing that love and support had been the foundation of my strength. I had gone from being a dishwasher to someone who took on powerful adversaries. I had not only reclaimed my dignity, but also carved a path for my future. I graduated law school with honors and began working as an advocate for others who faced similar injustices. As I stood at the podium during my graduation ceremony, delivering a speech about resilience and justice, I knew my journey was just beginning. The fight against societal prejudice wasn't over, but I was ready to face it head-on, proving that one's worth isn't determined by background or wealth, but by integrity, loyalty, and the courage to stand up for oneself. And so, my story continues, with hope, strength, and the unwavering belief that love can conquer even the darkest of challenges. I had no idea what was going on at the time and spent a lot of time doubting my husband. This was almost 10 years ago. I was in my 30s and had only recently married my husband. With my husband working so hard even before we married, I expected life with them to be difficult. But he never came home for so long that I felt alone. At first, I tried to let my husband relax at home during the rare times he would be at home, but my frustration grew. I became harsh with him every time I saw his face. My husband would try to soothe me, but if he saw that I was still unsatisfied, he started to ignore me. I wanted him to look at me no matter how busy he was with his work because we were married. This emotion got the best of me, and I couldn't look at my husband objectively any longer. Whenever I would pick a fight with my husband, he would always say, "I'm going to settle down soon, and then we'll go to that island you like." But this never came true. "Work is more important than me, isn't it?" I said. "If so, don't force yourself to come home. I'm tired too, and seeing you so excited makes me sad." No matter how many horrible things I said to him, he never took it seriously, and I began to have a nagging feeling that our marriage was coming to an end. Soon after, my husband could tell I wasn't even mad at him and had no feelings for him. I didn't suspect it at first because he worked in a department with many business trips. But one day, I found a receipt and membership card for a hotel near a house in his suit pocket after he came home from a business trip. The receipt indicated that he had stayed at the hotel on the day when he was out of town on a business trip, and he had accumulated points for more than one night. As a successful businessman who could get the job done, my husband was quite popular with the ladies at work. I guessed that he had found another woman to be with. Why should I have a hard time when he is enjoying being with another woman? I went out at 9 in spite of my husband's infidelity and made plans on weekends too. It was fun for a while, but eventually I grew tired. I was tired of forcing myself to smile and not being able to truly enjoy myself. Perhaps it was finally time for my husband and me to be free. We're both avoiding each other, not facing each other as husband and wife. It would be preferable if my husband was happier with someone other than me. I suppose it's time for me to move on to the next chapter of my life, but this is the husband I used to love until I realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life with him. It took a lot of guts for me to ask for a divorce. I also wondered if there was really no other option but to call it quits, but it seems that my husband has a new girlfriend. After days of deliberation, I made a decision and sent a text message to my husband's cell phone. "Will you come home early today? I need to talk to you," I texted him on his cell phone. "I need to talk to you too, and I'll try to leave as soon as possible," he replied right away. I found myself thinking that my husband must not want a divorce, even though I was certain I had made my decision. My husband is also seeking a divorce. Just thinking about it made my heart race so fast that I couldn't breathe, and I struggled to stand. My husband's heart was not with me. It went to someone else. At the very least, I should end things with a smile, I thought to myself. I made my decision and waited for my husband to return home. It was shortly after 9 p.m. when my husband returned home. He'd lost an unexpected amount of weight. His kind eyes and tone of voice remained the same, but there was a gap between us that seemed insurmountable. My husband, who had never been a man of many words, kept looking down and remained silent, except for a few words while I spoke. I wanted to end the conversation with my husband in a respectful manner because I felt he was making fun of me. We were a married couple, albeit for a short time, and we were about to divorce, so why wouldn't he tell me how he felt? I became increasingly angry and began to argue with him. However, my husband remained silent and listened to what I had to say. I wanted him to say something, so I told him that I knew about his new girlfriend. He probably thought I was oblivious to the fact. If he knew I knew everything, he would become impatient and make one excuse after another. Hearing my words, my husband looked at me in surprise, then smiled briefly. After a brief pause, he asked, "What did you know?" Strangely, I couldn't help but laugh at his joking tone, which made my husband laugh, and for the first time in a long time, we laughed together, regardless of the topic of conversation. I was overjoyed to be able to laugh with my husband like we used to. We were able to talk again after that, which was a strange sensation. Perhaps it was because he found out I knew about the affair. My husband's face appeared to be revitalized. "Let's stop attacking each other. I don't want to leave you because I don't like you," he said. My husband agreed to my proposal, and we decided to clean our room and share our belongings so that we could leave at any time. They were all precious memories, but they were all things I wanted to keep hidden for a while. My husband has always been the type of person who uses things he's had for years, but today he didn't hesitate to throw them away. His grace overwhelmed me even more. "Take anything you want. It's all my fault, so this is my atonement," he said. When the room was clean and tidy, and we only had each other's belongings, my husband's eyes seemed to be filled with tears as he said this. Did he feel sad as he cleaned up the mess? That was very clear to me because I felt the same way. "You still have time to think about it, don't you? Let's clean up one step at a time," I decided. I took a break for the rest of the day after cleaning up the entire mess. I took a bath to clear my mind. I should be able to get compensation for my unfaithful husband, but it was clear that our relationship had already ended. Besides, I don't want to tame my memories of my husband any further. As I was getting ready for bed after the bath, my husband entered the bedroom. He climbed into bed and gently drew me into his arms. "Hey, this is weird, and I feel bad for your girlfriend," I said. My husband said quietly, "Just one more time, I want to be by your side." I stiffened slightly. He was trembling as he wrapped his arms around me. "Are you crying?" I asked him, but he didn't respond. I noticed that his body was lighter and more bony as I stroked his back. "Are you sure you're well? You appear to have shed some pounds," I said to him. When I said this to him, his body stopped shaking. "I've been cutting weight," he said, pulling his body away from mine, taking a deep breath. "Okay. Is there anything else I should know? Are you sure you're okay?" It had been a long time since I had touched my husband's body, and I was surprised to see how different it looked from before. My husband's physique was always stocky and muscular. Even when he was busy, he enjoyed working out. But he told me, "She likes me like this." I was sad once more. He's doing it for her. Why doesn't he just forget about me if he enjoys being with her so much that he loses weight? I thought to myself, I see. Then there's no need to cry because it's the last day, or is it tears of joy to keep my sadness at bay? I said something sarcastic that I didn't need to say. "You're still the same. I like that part of you too." "I wish you a happy life from tomorrow," my husband said lightly. After saying that, my husband began to snore. He was a man who moved at his own pace until the end. "I hope so as well," I murmured to his sleeping face before falling asleep. I overslept the next day because I had stayed up late cleaning up the room the day before. My husband was no longer in bed when I awoke. When I entered the living room, I noticed an A4 size envelope on the table. When I opened it, I discovered a bank book and a slew of documents inside. When I removed everything, I discovered that it was related to marital property. There was also an unusually large sum of money in the bank book in my name, and I discovered the divorce papers in a small envelope. My husband's section had already been filled, so all that remained was for me to complete and submit mine. In a panic, I dialed my husband's cell phone, but it was disconnected because it appeared to have been canceled. I spent several days asking about my husband's whereabouts with his parents and friends, but none of them would tell me. I had no choice but to contact his company, where I discovered that my husband, that workaholic, had resigned a few months before. Who would have made sense if he made a new girlfriend and left, but why go to such lengths? Why didn't anyone tell me anything? I've grown suspicious of people, and there appears to be no way to contact my husband. The mental fatigue that had been building up since before the divorce nearly crushed me. My husband had gone to the trouble of arranging compensation for me, and now that I was free, I decided to spend some time in a place I really enjoyed. We arrived at the remote island, which took nearly a day to reach from the mainland. The island was depopulated, and about 3,000 people lived there. I had visited the island once with my husband and was captivated by its natural beauty and the slow flow of time. My husband promised that we would return to the island once his work was completed. I miss my husband, but maybe what I need now is the peace and quiet of that place. I quit my job and moved to this remote island a few months later after renting the house to someone else. It was a risky move on my part, but I knew I couldn't stay in my house any longer. I'm not sure how my husband paid off the mortgage, but I know he worked very hard. But there were too many memories to keep living alone in the house. However, I didn't want to waste my husband's efforts, so I didn't want to just let it go. There are many strange things, but I can't ask my husband about them anymore. I plan to spend time on this quiet island, relaxing and letting myself go. I began to adjust to island life and became acquainted with my neighbors. I had enough assets to live a normal life without working, but I realized that doing nothing was even more depressing. So, I started working as a sort of helper, assisting the elderly neighbors with their problems. I was initially treated as an outsider, but as I became more used to the work, I was relieved to be accepted as one of the islanders. As I was settling in, I learned from a coworker that a new client had arrived from the mainland for medical treatment. He had become ill and had chosen this island as his final residence because there was no treatment available. Moving to this island with no medical facilities would be difficult unless you are very prepared. Thinking about being in charge was difficult when the new client asked for a visit, and I was the only one free. I had heard about his medical condition, so I was nervous as I went to his house. We arrived at this small house on a hill with a view of the ocean. The house had been vacant for a long time and had been renovated to the point where it was livable, but it was really just enough to keep the wind and rain out. I questioned whether this was the best place for him to spend his final days. With concern, I rang the doorbell. "Come in," a small voice said, barely audible. I gave my usual greeting and entered. I found my client sitting in front of a window, the sun and wind streaming in. I couldn't see his face because it was backlit, so I squinted as I approached. "It's a pleasure to meet you today, sir," I said, looking at the face that had turned to me. I was speechless. My ex-husband sat there. We were both taken aback. We just stood there, staring. My husband initiated the conversation. "You found me out," he said, mischievously smiling like before. "What exactly are you doing here?" I was so confused by my husband's presence, the fact that he wasn't supposed to be there, as well as the information I had heard at work, that I couldn't speak properly. My husband grabbed my hand and forced me to sit next to him. He sat next to me and held my hand until I relaxed. I couldn't think of anything to say to him, and as I sat there, I heard a voice at the door. I wiped my tears and opened the door, where an elderly man stood. He seemed surprised to see my tear-stained face, but he bowed, went inside, and sat down next to my husband. "How are you doing today?" he inquired in a soft voice. My husband said that there was nothing unusual and began chatting with him. The elderly man was most likely the island's only doctor. I remembered my colleagues telling me that there were no inpatient facilities on the island, and that the clinic nurse and doctor were the island's lifelines. So it appears that my husband came to the island to spend his final days here, although it was his decision. I listened intently to their conversation. I was wondering if there was anything I could do to help. My husband's doctor left after about 10 minutes of casual conversation. I couldn't help myself and ran after him. I guess my flustered appearance startled him again, but when I told him of our relationship, he seemed to understand. I questioned the doctor about my husband's condition and future treatment, but he said, "I can't tell you without his consent." Maybe he felt sorry for me and said he won't be able to walk by himself very soon. It seemed a shame for him to spend his final days alone, so please be there for him. I was stunned. What became of my husband's girlfriend? I returned back to the house with heavy steps where my husband was waiting. My husband appeared to have anticipated my questioning the doctor and greeted me with a smile. "You're back." I couldn't live without my husband, so I asked him to let me spend the night. My husband's house was only a few pieces of luggage and a couple of futons. It was the first time I'd slept with my husband since we discussed divorce. As I cuddled up under the covers with my husband, we told each other how we got here. I was eager to ask about his illness, but I decided that it wasn't time to talk about painful topics, so we reminisced. This was also due to my feelings about his relationship with her. I asked him if he hadn't brought her to the island before I asked to stay, but he just laughed and covered up. The fact that he didn't say anything suggested that there was a sad event. I was careful not to hurt his feelings by asking any more questions. The next day, I informed my employer of what had occurred and decided to take some time off. I wanted to spend what time my husband had with him. I took my husband, who couldn't walk very far, around the island in a wheelchair. There were places I remembered from my previous visit, places and scenery I wanted to show him for the first time. It was satisfying just being together. I wish we'd been disclosed when we were married. Even after my divorce, I discovered that the feelings I had grew stronger, but there's nothing I could do about it now. My husband will be confused if I told him. Like friends, I would stay by his side. The good times were fleeting, but the disease was gradually taking its toll on my husband. His physical strength had deteriorated to the point where he could no longer go out or even take the long-awaited walks. Even daily tasks became difficult, and he began to doze off and fall asleep more frequently. The doctor came to see him every day, but the only relief was that he was no longer in pain. I couldn't believe that this was natural and that he would leave me so soon. I nursed my husband, never leaving his side for a second so he wouldn't be alone when he awoke, which could happen at any time. Sometimes he'd wake up and tell me the rest of the dream he just awoke from, and other times he'd tell me about long-ago memories as if they just happened. I loved every moment, and this love exacerbated my sadness. My husband gradually stopped waking up after that. When we stopped talking, I stayed by his side, reading his favorite books and telling him about the sights and sounds I'd missed so he could understand. I wanted to tell him about a beautiful sunset one day, so I held his hand and tried to speak to him. My husband's hand was cold to the touch, he was barely breathing, and his chest moved in an unnatural way. I panicked and called the doctor, who said he would be there right away. I waited for him, feeling as if my heart was being ripped out of my chest by the out-of-control situation. I hoped it was a misunderstanding. I wanted him to reassure me that everything will be fine. However, when the doctor arrived, he took a look and said, "His blood pressure has already dropped quite a bit. Let him go in peace. I believe he wants you to stay with him, so I'll sit this one out. Don't worry, I'll be right there if anything happens, so please stay by his side." The doctor then said goodbye to my husband and walked out. So the time has come. I knew we would come, but it was unbearable. I was delighted to have met you. There were some challenges, but the truth is that I adore you. I helped my husband's hand and whispered in his ear. Then my husband gently squeezed my hand back. It was medically impossible, but I clearly felt it. Soon after, he took his last breath and died quietly. I couldn't stop crying, but I was glad to have been there for him at the end. I was so busy after he had died that I didn't have time to mourn until after the burial. When I finally got home after cleaning up my husband's belongings, I noticed that mail had accumulated like a mountain. I was struck by the nostalgic handwriting I discovered as I went through them one by one. My husband had written dozens of letters. I wondered how long it had been since I had spent every day with him trying to keep as close to him as possible. His letter started on the day of our reunion. My husband had moved here in the hope of seeing me again, but he didn't expect to actually find me here. It was difficult for him not to notice how surprised and delighted he was. It read, "I couldn't stop laughing at how funny my husband's letters were, and the fact that my husband felt that way was the best compliment he could have given me." A date and a letter indicated that he had been posting it every day, but his handwriting became more dirty and the length of the letter became shorter as the days passed, clearly demonstrating the progression of his illness. With sadness, I continued reading, but my eyes stopped at one point. He had written the truth about our divorce. My husband's illness started during our marriage. When he discovered it, there was nothing they could do to help him, and the treatment he received as his last hope was ineffective and only had side effects. My husband made plans to divorce me because he didn't want me to spend the rest of my life with this disease, and I fell right into his trap. He had no idea I'd suspect the existence of another woman, but he didn't deny it because he thought he could give a lot of money to me as compensation because I no longer required medical treatment. I wanted to liquidate all of my assets so that you could live freely. He wrote, "What hurtful words I'd heard, my husband, who had thought that far from me." I sincerely apologized. Tears flowed uncontrollably. Then there was a knock on the front door. I wiped my tears quickly and opened the door to find my doctor standing there. "What brings you here, doctor?" I inquired. When I asked, he handed me a sealed envelope. The envelope was identical to the one I had just read from my husband. He asked me to post it every day. He wrote a few days' worth of letters before he fell into a coma, and he entrusted them to me. I couldn't refuse, and this is the last letter. He asked me to give it to you when you returned to your home. So that's what this was about. This was my husband's final letter. I thanked the doctor and read my husband's letter alone. When I opened it quietly and calmly, I found a thin but clear note that said, "Thank you, I love you." We had come so far, but our hearts remained connected. "I love you too." When I said this, I thought that I saw my husband's portrait's mouth smile a little. I am still living on this island decades after my husband died. I am now officially recognized as an island resident. I built a grave next to where my husband's house used to stand the day I was sure I'd never leave the island. My husband used to look out the window every day, and I'm sure he still does. I intend to join him there one day, and I am at peace and very happy to be surrounded by memories of my husband.